The man was walking toward the entrance of the luxury hotel, his simple and somewhat worn clothes contrasting with the shine that surrounded the building. His shoes were dusty, and his backpack, although functional, didn't quite fit the neat and sophisticated atmosphere that reigned in the lobby. At first glance, he seemed like any ordinary visitor, perhaps a low-budget tourist or someone lost in an exclusive neighborhood. But there was something in his walk, in the way he looked ahead, that suggested confidence. It was not the typical insecurity of someone afraid they would be denied entry. When he reached the reception desk, he smiled warmly, cordial but without showiness. The receptionist, an elegant young woman who looked like she stepped out of a fashion catalog, looked up and froze the moment she saw him. "Excuse me, sir, do you have a reservation?" she asked in a tone that tried to be professional but sounded more like a hidden barrier, an unspoken test. He nodded calmly and placed the crumpled papers he carried in his hands on the counter. What could have been a polite welcome ended in an awkward, almost tangible silence. The receptionist looked at the paper as if she didn't intend to believe it, as if it were a mistake or a badly made joke. The hotel manager, a burly man with an imposing air and an aura of authority, approached and repeated the question with a hint of disdain. "Are you sure this reservation is for this hotel?" It sounded more like a statement than a question. All around, the staff radiated a sort of expectation, as if they were ready to reject without considering any other option. The man, modestly dressed, barely moved a muscle. He took out a pen and began to show the confirmation on his mobile phone. There shone the name of the hotel, the most expensive available reservation, with a confirmation number that left no doubt. It was a VIP package, with services and exclusives reserved only for high-level clients. Confusion grew at reception, and the tension among the employees was palpable. How was it possible that this man, with modest clothing and an ordinary appearance, held the most costly reservation? The receptionist swallowed hard, the manager frowned, and some tourists waiting in line turned anxiously with a mix of disbelief and curiosity. While this was happening, the man didn't react immediately. He seemed to enjoy the small effect his simple presence caused, a profound silence that questioned the unspoken rules of the hotel and generally of society. Then, with a barely perceptible smile, he shared a single phrase that echoed throughout the space. "Never judge a book by its cover." That phrase was a spark that triggered a torrent of questions in everyone's mind. Who was this man really? How had he gotten that reservation? And why choose to dress so simply? Was it a mistake? A mockery? But above all, what would happen now that the privilege of entry was in his hands? While the hotel manager went to seek his superiors to resolve the situation, the crowd at reception began to shift their perception. Some raised their eyebrows suspiciously, others admired the man's courage and calm, and a few quietly murmured about the absurdity of judging someone by what they wore. Minutes passed, and uncertainty grew. The man took the opportunity to carefully observe every detail of the hotel. The paintings on the walls, the Persian rug, the floral arrangements. Simplicity and luxury in the same place. But something else caught his attention, something intangible, perhaps a place where he truly didn't belong. Yet there he was, and his papers confirmed it. Suddenly, the manager returned, accompanied by a woman with a cold but dignified gaze, probably the hotel director. He quickly presented the situation, emphasizing the uncomfortable confusion. She looked at the man with a mixture of challenge and curiosity, not taking her eyes off the phone where the reservation proving everything shone. Silence fell completely. A few seconds, which in reality felt eternal, before she made the most unexpected gesture. A slight nod toward the man, followed by a subtle order to let him pass. The security guard, who until then had maintained a rigid stance, opened the door without a word. Upon entering, the man did not seek to impose himself. He walked calmly, like someone used to moving in worlds very different from the artificial shine of the hotel. The murmur among the employees turned into barely audible whispers, mixed with distrustful looks and in some cases silent admiration. The difference between his appearance and his reservation was an uncomfortable and persistent echo in the atmosphere. As he rode up in the elevator, His mind seemed distant, but the smile he held hinted at a well-kept secret. Not everything was apparent, and every step he took inside the hotel opened doors to a less visible past and a true story of overcoming. Who was he? What had brought him to that precise moment? And what was he going to do now that he had the key to enter a world that, at first glance, seemed so inaccessible? Just as the elevator doors opened, a new figure appeared on the scene, a person with an equally simple appearance but with a sparkle in their eyes that announced this story was just beginning to take shape. A quick glance was enough for the man to understand that he was not alone in this world of contrasts and prejudices. Would this be an unexpected ally, or the start of another conflict? At that moment, the imaginary camera of our story would capture every gesture, the slight tension in their jaws, the eyes meeting with interest, and the unspoken question floating in the air. What now? Because this was not just about entering an expensive hotel with a confirmed reservation. It was much deeper. It was a brutal clash between appearance and reality, between judgment and truth. And above all, it was an opportunity to change the rules of the game. The man knew the real challenge was yet to come, and that to win it, it was not enough to prove he could pay for the most expensive room. He also had to break all the invisible barriers built with prejudice, fear, and resentment. And as he walked down that corridor lit by luxury, he felt that his next move would define not only what he was but who he truly wanted to be. After this episode at the entrance, the hotel's eyes had shifted focus. He was no longer just another client. He was now an enigma, a living mystery stirring the comfort of the established order. The staff began to speculate. Some suggested he was a famous artist hiding his identity. Others mentioned a wealthy businessman who preferred to go unnoticed. But no one knew for sure. On the staircase leading to the luxury suites, as he walked firmly, an employee whispered with a mix of admiration and bewilderment, "I've never seen anything like this. We always judge people by their appearance, and this has exposed us." That phrase resonated strongly with those who heard it, like an echo of what everyone feared to admit. For the man, those words were almost an unexpected reward. Because in that moment, he knew his presence had already planted a seed that, sooner or later, would bloom into a new way of seeing people beyond their clothes, money, or status. But for that, he first had to face the toughest expectation. His own. The assigned room was one of the most exclusive, with panoramic views and services that seemed out of this world. The luxury was overwhelming, yes, but even stronger was the contrast with his simple way of living. How was it possible that someone with so little and so simple had made it there? What did that simplicity hide? As he hung his jacket, he began mentally reviewing the events that brought him there. Every step, every sacrifice. He thought about how life, with its unexpected twists, can test anyone's dignity and patience, and how, sometimes, the less visible paths lead to the most surprising destinations. The room was no longer just a place to sleep. It was the symbol of an entire struggle, a small triumph amid a world that often measures people by their outward appearance. And though that night he would sleep surrounded by comfort, he knew the real challenge would be to stay true to who he was, without letting luxury define him. Because the story that began at the hotel door was just beginning to be written. And what seemed like a simple anecdote of denied entry became the gateway to a profound transformation, both for the man and for those who witnessed the moment, and perhaps for all of us. But what came next? What was the next step in this story that breaks molds and expectations? That, my friend, I will tell you in the next installment. I'll only say this. Sometimes true wealth is not in what we show, but in what we are capable of overcoming without losing our essence. And so, as the hotel lights slowly went out, intrigue remained alive. Because what seemed like a simple rejection had become a lesson never to forget. Never judge anyone by their appearance, because behind every person there may be a story that changes the way you see the world. If you want to discover what secrets this man holds, why that reservation was so important, and what impact it had on everyone around him, don't miss the next part. Because the story is just beginning, and believe me, the best is yet to come. The man walked firmly toward the imposing hotel entrance, a glass and steel structure that seemed to touch the very sky. His simple clothing sharply contrasted with the luxurious air of the place. A modest shirt, somewhat worn pants, and a pair of shoes that had seen better days. However, his gaze showed no insecurity, but a steely, almost unshakable determination. As he approached, a couple of employees watched him with a certain disdain. He seemed out of place in the neat and exclusive world that filled the air there. As soon as he reached the reception desk, a woman in a flawless uniform and a professional smile stopped him. "Excuse me, sir. This is not a place for you," she said with a hint of condescension. The cold gleam in her eyes said more than her words. He was just another on the list of unwelcome people there. But the man did not react with annoyance nor insist. He simply extended a device toward the receptionist, a mobile phone displaying a bright, clear screen, the email confirming a reservation. It was no ordinary reservation. It was the most expensive one, the presidential suite, the most exclusive of all. The official document bore his name in large, unmistakable letters. His real name, not an alias or a mistake. For a moment the atmosphere changed. The employees looked at each other, confused and then alarmed. Surveillance cameras and other guests watched silently. The man remained calm, undisturbed by the mysterious aura surrounding him since his arrival. At that moment, an apology or at least a gesture of acceptance should have occurred. But none of that happened. The tension rose. The receptionist barely managed to stammer that she would check the information, but her movements betrayed nervousness. The man knew there was more behind that initial rejection, an untold story, a shadow of prejudice he tried to erase with the proof of his reservation. The manager or person in charge had not appeared yet, but he knew their arrival was only a matter of minutes. What no one knew, however, was that this encounter was not by chance. There are times when a modest face hides greater secrets, and this was no exception. His presence there promised not only to break expectations but to challenge the entire culture of exclusivity that the hotel upheld as an unmovable altar. What hidden motivations did this man have? Why did he choose a place where he was seen as a stranger? The receptionist sought a quick solution, fearful of causing a scene when someone else appeared. A tall man in a flawless suit and severe expression approached the counter with determined steps. He was the manager, the hotel's ultimate authority. The tension immediately increased. The manager, in a firm but professional voice, asked, "What is the problem?" The young woman quickly explained the situation, though without many details. When they showed the reservation, the manager frowned and took the phone. There, among messages and internal systems, the line between what seemed impossible and reality blurred. The reservation under that simple man's name was authentic. He had paid in advance, confirmed everything correctly, and the system showed no errors. But the attitude in the room did not soften in favor of the man. It worsened. The initial surprise turned into suspicion. How could someone with that appearance have made such an expensive reservation? The manager looked at him distrustfully, searching for some lie or deception. At that moment, he began to wonder if behind that simple facade there was a deeper story. Was this a person he had underestimated, or was there something more behind his presence? He could not explain the combination of modesty and paid luxury. And amidst those thoughts, the man with the reservation spoke for the first time since his arrival. His voice was calm, almost serene, but with an intensity that silenced everyone. "I did not come to ask for permission nor to justify my presence. I am here because I fulfilled all the requirements, and because I deserve to be in this place as much as any of you." Those words resonated in the lobby, cutting through the confusion and stirring a mixture of respect and surprise. No one expected such a straightforward and confident declaration. Then someone else noticed something. A guest who had been nearby overheard a phone conversation that the man had had minutes before on the street, and in his tone, in his words, there were hints of a story that no one had bothered to imagine. Attention shifted momentarily. The air filled with curiosity. No one yet understood all that was at stake. Had he been hungry? Had he suffered discrimination? Was he an emerging entrepreneur, a man who had made his fortune far from where everyone was looking. The mystery deepened, and the tension only grew. Meanwhile, the man remained still, not allowing discomfort to break him down. He seemed to be giving a silent performance, a lesson in patience and dignity. Many whispered among themselves, speculated about his unknown identity. Questions came and went, and each answer seemed to open a door to another doubt. The manager decided to act cautiously but firmly. He could not allow a misunderstanding to undermine the hotel's reputation, nor permit injustice in its halls. However, the existence of that reservation was undeniable, and there were no valid excuses to deny him entry. Then he asked to be shown the official confirmation. The electronic lines displayed the full payment and the deposit made. The system clearly indicated that the man was entitled to the suite, just like any other wealthy or influential guest. But the real problem was not administrative or financial. It was prejudice. It was the mistaken perception that modest attire inspired in those at reception and beyond. It was the preconceived idea of who deserves what, a social construct that the man was ready to destroy with the simple force of truth and his presence. At that moment, someone suggested allowing him to enter and guaranteeing his comfort, but not everyone agreed. Some employees murmured that the man might not be who he said he was, that perhaps he was trying to deceive or sneak in. Others began pulling out their phones to look up his name online, to uncover any data that could justify or cancel the reservation. The atmosphere grew tense. The man, without hurry or fear, observed everything calmly. He knew this initial rejection would be only the first obstacle. But he also knew that all eyes were on him, and that his reaction could change everything. And just when it seemed the situation had reached its most tense point, a new turn occurred. A voice came from the back of the room. It was a woman, elegant and authoritative, who approached with determined steps. She carried a briefcase in her hand and a look that hid a mix of surprise and respect. "I think it's time to clarify this," she said firmly. "Gentlemen, I present to you Mr. Alvaro Mendoza." A murmur ran through the room. He was not just another guest. Alvaro Mendoza was a known figure in certain economic and social circles, although he usually avoided ostentatious places and such labels. His reputation was that of a visionary entrepreneur, someone who had started from the bottom and was now making a significant mark in the business world. He turned to the manager with a slight but confident smile. "I apologize for any inconvenience. My journey here has very important purposes, and it is no coincidence that I chose this hotel to stay. I am here because I have proven with deeds, not appearances, that I deserve to be where I am." The silence was absolute. No one knew whether to applaud or just admire the scene. The reception no longer had an excuse to deny him entry. What began as an episode of prejudice and ignorance ended with a powerful lesson about appearances, labels, and what truly matters. Employees began moving the man's luggage, preparing to offer service befitting the reservation he had paid for. The other guests settled into their places, some casting looks of respect, others of discomfort, and a few of envy. But the story did not end there. The questions left hanging were many. How had Alvaro Mendoza changed the perception of that whole world? What decision would the hotel take now? And what would be the reaction of those who had rejected him without even knowing him? All that was yet to be discovered in the moments to come. But one thing was clear. That morning, the simply dressed man did not just enter a luxury hotel. He broke molds, challenged prejudices, and wrote a new page for all those who had ever been judged solely by how they looked. The story was just beginning. And you, what would you do if you were in his place? Would you let appearance be the barrier? Or would you demonstrate, like him, that your actions and decisions are worth much more than any label? This is not just a story about a hotel or a reservation. It is a reflection on the invisible injustice many face daily. Don't jump to conclusions. Wait and see how it all unfolds, because what comes next will surprise you more than you imagine. Just when it seemed that the type of clothes he was wearing would be his definitive sentence to get in, the man took a step forward, confident, almost defiant. The hotel door remained firm, guarded by the scrutinizing gaze of the receptionist, a man with a spotless tie and furrowed eyebrows who seemed to embody all the prejudices in the world. "I'm sorry, sir, but visitors without appropriate attire are not allowed here," he said, avoiding even looking at the document the man was holding in his hands. It seemed like an invisible code between them. "If you don't look like one of us, you don't get in." But the man did not step back. He had something more in his hand than just hope. A reservation, a digital confirmation that shone on the screen of his phone, like an intangible trophy that defied all appearances. Noticing this, the receptionist frowned even more, as if the screen of that device showed an error he refused to believe. "Is that your reservation?" he asked in a tone mixing surprise and doubt. "Yes," he replied with a calm voice, almost a whisper that, nonetheless, cut through the air clearly. "A reservation for tonight. And not just any. The presidential suite. The most expensive and exclusive in the hotel." There was an absurd, almost unreal silence, as if the place floated between two realities, two parallel truths. The other guests, elegantly dressed and drinking cocktails, couldn't take their eyes off the plainly dressed man and his glowing screen. The soft music in the lobby seemed to pause for a moment, giving way to a new pulse, something no one expected. How could it be? An ordinary man, dressed without any luxury, claiming a reservation at the city's most exclusive hotel. Tension escalated as the receptionist wavered between disbelief and protocol. "Can you show me some ID or form of payment?" he demanded, as if trying to find a crack in that story that seemed too good to be true. The man made no gesture other than sliding his credit card through the reader, a black, elegant card without a visible name, but enough to trigger all alarms in the system. The device's tone indicated an approved payment, instant and secure. It was real. The room was paid for, the reservation confirmed, the ticket to enter clear and open. However, before the receptionist could do anything else, something deeper happened. The hotel staff began to look at the man differently. Some whispered among themselves, others exchanged puzzled glances. The news spread quickly through the lobby. A guest with the top suite reserved, and dressed as if he didn't have a single penny. A mistake. A joke. The hotel manager, alerted by the commotion, appeared at the counter with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "Who are you really?" he asked firmly, yet without stopping to observe every detail of the man who didn't fit in that social map. The answer came with the same calm as before, but with undeniable strength. "My name is Daniel. And tonight this suite is mine. Paid and reserved in advance," he said while raising his phone showing the payment confirmation and the invoice. "Could you explain why you are dressed like that then?" the manager inquired, trying to disguise the mix of respect and puzzlement. Daniel smiled faintly, and for a moment it seemed he was about to tell a whole story, but he only said, "I can't always buy appearances. But I always know how to get what I want." That phrase echoed in the lobby, stretching awake among the background murmurs. Little by little, the tension gave way to a kind of electrifying expectation. What had Daniel achieved? What did he have that no one else there possessed? The question floated in the air as the staff began preparing the room for his arrival, as if a silent pact of respect had been sealed in just a few minutes. Daniel, the simply dressed man, was about to enter a world that until that moment had closed its doors to him without even a glance. But this story had just begun. The private room where the suite was located was not only waiting for an unforgettable guest, but also hid secrets no one imagined. As Daniel rode the elevator up, the gaze of everyone present could not look away from him. Because this was not just a story of overcome prejudices, but a game of power, identity, and surprises yet to be revealed. Who is this man, and how did he manage to bypass everything that seemed obvious at first glance? What would happen inside those luxurious walls, once the gazes faded and silence took over? The elevator stopped on the top floor. The door opened like a silent invitation, and Daniel walked toward the suite, unhurried, with the confidence of someone who knows he has already won a battle that many haven't even realized existed. And just as the door closed behind him, leaving outside the disbelief and surprised whispers tainted in the lobby, outside in the hallways, a figure watched hidden behind a mirror, with an expression no one could interpret at first glance. Because that hotel not only held reservations and dazzling rooms, but also stories of intrigue, of secrets that could change everything. And Daniel, dressed like anyone, simple without luxury, was the key to opening many of those hidden doors. What secret did he have up his sleeve? What game was about to begin? No one could know. But at that very moment, a slight tremor was felt in the atmosphere, as if the hotel's very sophistication feared what was about to happen. And then, as the door closed, Daniel's phone vibrated. A message appeared on the screen. A message that was not only a payment confirmation but a challenge. "We know who you are. You won't be able to hide here." Daniel read it calmly. He smiled again, that smile that seemed to hide a world. The game had just begun. The man, with his forehead beaded with sweat and his hands slightly trembling, pulled a wrinkled and worn piece of paper from his pocket. It was his reservation at the most luxurious hotel in the city. The receptionist, shrunk into his immaculate uniform, barely looked up at first, as if it wasn't worth the effort. "Sir, I think you must wait outside. This is an exclusive establishment and we have very clear rules about who is allowed in." His tone was firm, almost cold. But when the man held the paper in front of his eyes, the receptionist's face changed. From indifference, he shifted to disbelief. He read the name and details again and again. Presidential suite, 7 nights, VIP services included, and a guaranteed payment with a platinum card. "Did you make this reservation?" he asked, unable to hide the surprise that welled up strongly. The man nodded with a small, proud gesture that seemed to have lasted for years. There was something in his gaze, a mix of dignity and silence, that didn't fit with what that place was used to seeing. A few seconds felt like hours as the receptionist called his supervisor, interrupting with a soft murmur something that had until then been routine. The people waiting in the lobby began turning their heads, whispering, surprised by the scene. Some of them, dressed in ostentatious suits and jewelry reflecting the lobby's light, spoke among themselves, trying to understand what was happening. The hotel manager burst into the reception, carrying the authority only experience and power could grant. He approached the man and, without making it clear whether it was to congratulate or confront him, asked to see the reservation. He examined it carefully, his eyes narrowed and brow raised. "This can't be. You have the presidential suite booked for this week. But your attire does not match these kinds of reservations." The manager's voice revealed an internal conflict, as if he didn't know if he was speaking to an imposter or someone who had been underestimated. Suddenly, the tension in the room was palpable in the air, creating a knot impossible to ignore. The most urgent question was not whether the man could stay, but what was really happening. Why did someone who booked the most luxurious spot in the hotel arrive dressed so modestly? Was it a mistake or was there something behind this story? The anticipation grew as the manager, hesitating, asked the guest the reason for his outfit. The man's answer was simple and yet made everyone hold their breath. "I prefer to show who I am through my actions, not by how I dress. I don't want to be judged before I am known." This unexpected breath was like a shot in the middle of an uncomfortable stillness. The manager looked at the employees, some of whom returned the gaze with a mix of shame and remorse. Some guests looked at him skeptically, but others with genuine curiosity. The man asked to be taken to the suite. Someone hurried to open the elevator door for him, but the feeling of strangeness didn't fade. It multiplied. Who was this truly singular guest? As the elevator ascended, a subtle but powerful change was felt. The looks ceased to be so harsh and began to fill the space with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. In his thoughts, the man recalled how he had gotten to that point. Not just a reservation, but a silent statement against appearances and prejudices that still dominated certain spaces. That week promised to be decisive, not only for him but for everyone in that hotel. What would happen when he stepped out of the elevator and faced the world behind those shining doors? Just then, a waitress stumbled slightly and dropped a glass near the reception. The noise broke the tension like a splash of water. The employees quickly turned to help her, and the manager took the opportunity to whisper something to one of his assistants, who left the lobby with a firm step toward the presidential suite. Were they about to confirm an identity no one expected? The uncertainty grew and became a silent climax that made everyone in the lobby hold their breath. The man, now settled in the suite, sank into the enormous armchair with a small but meaningful smile. Outside, with every passing minute, something seemed to change in the hotel's perception, its rules and its prejudices. Because that reservation had not only opened the door to an exclusive place, but also a crack in the assumptions embraced by those who had never questioned what things seemed to be. The question now was not whether the man truly deserved all of that, but what story was behind that wrinkled piece of paper and that simple outfit that defied expectations. The manager received a call that immediately changed his expression. His hand trembled slightly as he held the phone. The voice on the other end was known and feared. "You have to make sure everything stays exactly as it is. Nothing of this can leak." The order sounded final, and in his words there was fear but also a veiled threat. Who was behind all this? Why was someone so unexpected in a position to shake the balance of that hotel and those who controlled it? Meanwhile, some guests began to recall earlier rumors, fragments of conversations about mysterious investments, hidden identities, and secrets kept under lock and key. More than a simple reservation, this was a much bigger game. A game of power, appearances, and disguised justice. And it all began with a man who, dressed like anyone from the street, had dared to step across a threshold some believed inaccessible to those of his class. The scene closes as the man looks out the window, watching the city pulse below. On his face, there is no arrogance or defeat, only a contained calm that suggests he is ready to face every shadow that crosses his path. Behind him, the hotel continues with its usual shine, but something has changed forever. And as the story is just beginning, deep questions hang in the air. Who is this man really? What secrets does he hide? And above all, what awaits him beyond the golden walls of that place? The camera slowly pulls away, leaving in the silence an unresolved mystery, the prelude to a story that promises to captivate far beyond the simple battle between appearance and reality. What seemed an unjust rejection has transformed into a challenge aimed straight at the heart of power. Because sometimes, a simple reservation can be the key to tearing down walls much taller than those of a luxury hotel. And that key today is in the hands of a man no one expected. When the modestly dressed man approached the counter again, the look of disdain on the receptionist's face turned into a mixture of confusion and surprise. He said nothing at first, only sliding a shiny card with a man's name written in golden letters that reflected the light from the tall chandeliers in the lobby. "Mr. Martinez," the employee read aloud, hardly believing it, while trembling fingers opened the app showing the hotel's most exclusive reservation, the presidential suite. An awkward silence fell over both of them. The other guests, who just minutes before couldn't take their eyes off the man, began murmuring among themselves, wondering what had happened for someone so humbly dressed to have rights to a place reserved only for the elite. Could it be a system error, a trick, or something much deeper? The man, with a faint but confident smile, remained calm. He didn't raise his voice or try to explain too much, but in his eyes was an unbreakable beacon of dignity and achievement. This very man whose appearance had been his condemnation was suddenly the rightful owner of the night in that five-star hotel. The tension was palpable as a guard approached, confused and controlling his orders. "Are you sure? This can't be right." He nodded without hesitation, holding the card in front of them. It was neither a dream nor a manipulation. The hotel system confirmed that his reservation included a private dinner, full spa access, and unlimited entry to the panoramic terrace for the night. What no one expected was how this digital document challenged the prejudices ingrained in every one of those present. But the story didn't end there. While the receptionist searched for some reason to justify the error at the front desk, a voice rose from the back. An elegant woman with an authoritative air stepped forward and pronounced the man's name with respect. "I know Jose Martinez. He's not just any client. His story is bigger than all our assumptions here." The attendees' gazes shifted to her, while he nodded silently, needing no comments. At that moment the scene began to change. The whispers grew, but they were no longer of astonishment at the contradiction, but of interest. Who was this man really? How had he obtained such an exclusive reservation? What lessons did this unexpected story of appearances and truths carry, breaking down prejudices? Jose walked to the elevator quietly without looking back. His steady step and serene expression sent a clear message. True wealth is not in clothing, nor in the place that receives or rejects you, but in what one knows and represents. Yet within those luxurious walls, he could feel the lingering stares, catching whispers that questioned everything they thought they knew about success and human worth. Was it fair to think that that initial rejection was a simple act of ignorance? Or perhaps a reflection of a system that allowed inequality not only to be seen in access to these spaces but in the way people judge without truly looking? As the elevator doors closed, Jose knew that night was not just a personal victory but a call to reflect on who we are and how we treat those who seem different at first glance. Upon arriving at the suite, the atmosphere changed completely. The luxury, the meticulous details, and respectful silence were no longer intimidating. They were a stage for a person who had worked quietly for years, with constant effort and sometimes a broken heart, to reach that place. However, one last question remained in the air, beyond the armored doors and visible luxuries. What would have happened if that man had never shown that reservation? If he had simply left quietly, allowing himself to be judged only by his appearance? That idea churned in the minds of those who had rejected him. In any case, the night was only the beginning. Because true stories are not judged by clothing or first impressions, but by the strength with which one overcomes the invisible obstacles others don't even want to see. And Jose Martinez, dressed with the humility of his walk but with victory etched in his bearing, was there to remind them. Then, just when you thought the story would turn into a simple anecdote of injustice corrected, an unexpected message arrived. An urgent email to management that could change everything once again. A possible error, a duplicated reservation, or perhaps another more complicated secret, leaving the door open to new questions and the next chapter of this story already starting to affect everyone in that hotel. Who was Jose Martinez really? What had he achieved? And what made him so different from those who judged him from the very first minute? Perhaps a lifetime of effort behind a simple image. Perhaps a lesson about dignity and perception. The truth is that that night in the hotel, something had changed forever, and no one could look the man who initially seemed just another guest the same way again. But this story does not end here. It's only beginning. Because to discover what it truly means to be rich, you have to look beyond appearances and dare to know the hidden truths beneath layers of prejudice. And Jose Martinez had much to tell, and even more to prove. Want to know what happened next? How did the staff react? What secrets did that reservation hold that seemed too good to be true? And what lessons were learned by all who that day discovered that the first judgment can be the biggest mistake of a lifetime? Don't miss the next part of this story, because here, in every word, in every silence, lies the strength of those who never give up, even when the world tries to push them back. As the hotel lights continued to shine and the city kept its fast pace, Jose Martinez was there. A man with a story that not even the most expensive rooms could contain. What mystery still remains to be discovered? Get ready, because what comes next is even more astonishing. And so, the narrative of that day was etched into everyone's memory. A reminder that true value is not in what we wear or where we go, but in who we are when no one is watching. He knew it, and that night, without saying another word, made it clear that there are no barriers for someone with heart and mind willing to break them down. Don't go away. This story is just beginning, and every new twist will surprise you more. What decisions will Jose make? How will the hotel respond? How many hidden things lie beneath that reservation? All that and more in the next episode. Until then, remember, never judge a book by its cover. Because sometimes the most valuable things are found where you least expect them. The man in worn clothes stood still, with trembling hands inside the pockets of his ragged jacket, while the receptionist looked at him with a mixture of annoyance and skepticism. "Sir, we've told you this hotel is for guests with confirmed reservations," she repeated sharply. He nodded, although he could hardly hold her gaze, as if the mere idea of defending himself was a superhuman effort. But at that moment, someone from the back of the lobby raised their voice. "Ma'am, wait a moment," said a firm voice belonging to the manager who had just come down the golden staircase with determined steps. "Did you say he has a reservation?" he asked directly, looking attentively at the humble man in front of the reception. The woman at the counter seemed to hesitate for a fraction of a second before pulling out a small tablet and quickly starting to search. The air in the lobby grew electric, and a low murmur began to rise among the guests who gradually approached to see what was happening. The man, who just moments ago had felt invisible among the crowd, now had all eyes on him. He, however, seemed to want to disappear. "Let me check," the receptionist finally said, nervously tapping the screen. After a few seconds that felt eternal, she looked up, her wide eyes showing a mixture of surprise and confusion. "Sir, your name is here. But it is one of the most expensive and exclusive reservations we have for tonight," she explained. An awkward silence followed her words. Everyone's eyes rested on the man and his simple iridescent jacket, his faded pants and his worn-out shoes. How could someone dressed like that own a reservation worth thousands of dollars at one of the city's most exclusive hotels? The manager frowned and slowly approached the man, speaking in a low but firm tone. "Can you explain this to us? Why didn't you identify yourself earlier? Why such a different appearance?" The questions hung in the air, but the only response the man gave was a slight smile, remaining silent for a moment before speaking. "My appearance never truly defines who I am," he said softly, but clearly, almost with a hint of restrained pride. "My name is there, and that's enough. Sometimes what we wear is just a disguise the world forces us to wear or ignore to fit in. But I'm tired of hiding who I am, and today I needed to be here without masks, without pretenses." There was an echo of respect sown in that phrase that resonated deeply with those listening. No one knew what to think, and doubts sprang up almost simultaneously. Was he perhaps a wealthy man refusing to accept his wealth? Or was he someone with a much more complex story, with secrets none of those present suspected? The manager, who had briefly lost his composure, regained his voice and, in a gesture that surprised everyone, kindly extended his hand toward the man. "Allow me to apologize. It was a mistake and also a prejudice. You have every right to be here." The staff began to step aside, and some people in the crowd even applauded, as if wanting to vindicate the man who had defied their expectations. But the man, though grateful, still did not move toward the open door. He seemed thoughtful, with an indecisive gleam in his eyes. What did he really want in such a luxurious place? What mystery was hidden behind that simple reservation? Suddenly, before anyone could ask more questions, the man walked toward a nearby table where an old, worn briefcase rested. Carefully opening it, he took out a folder. "There is something else you should know," he remarked as he unfolded several documents, cards and photographs that he passed from hand to hand. There was evidence that completely challenged the initial perception. Million-dollar investments, recognitions in international businesses, contributions to philanthropic causes that no one in the lobby had ever heard of. Each sheet clearly illustrated that this man not only held the most expensive reservation but was a powerful figure, hidden beneath a cloak of intentional simplicity. A woman in the group, with a refined appearance and skeptical gaze, brought a document closer with curiosity. Then why come dressed like this and not show anything before? Why that attitude that seemed almost humble? The answer was almost a whisper. Because sometimes the world focuses too much on appearance and forgets to look at the person. Tonight, I wanted them to see me as I am, without embellishments or titles. The phrase fell like an uncomfortable truth among the audience, who began to question their own prejudices. Amid that moment of revelation, a background noise interrupted the magical tension. Someone had called the manager on the phone, and the brief conversation changed his expression. "We have a small problem on one of the upper floors," he said sharply before hanging up. "Sorry, I have to attend to that. Please, let's continue calmly." The attention fragmented a bit, but the man did not lose the moment. "This only confirms something," he added as he gathered his documents and stood up. No matter how much you own or the power you have, some barriers only break when someone is willing to question them. Without waiting for answers, he headed to the elevator, leaving behind a confused but impressed group. Everyone's eyes stayed on his steps. Just as the elevator was about to close, an urgent voice called him from the reception. It was a small child, one of the children of a guest who had quietly watched everything. "Sir, could I ever see what you have in that folder?" he asked innocently. He stopped and, with a genuine smile, crouched down to meet him at eye level. "Of course," he replied, "but only if you promise not to judge by clothes or appearance. Because behind every person there is always a story worth listening to." The child nodded excitedly, and the elevator descended, carrying with it a mystery that still vibrated in the air. The group remained in heavy silence, divided between admiration and bewilderment. Many began to whisper among themselves, wondering who that man really was and what true reasons had led him to present himself that night dressed so humbly in a place that, to all, seemed distant and inaccessible. While the hotel's camera captured their long shadows against the marble walls, the manager looked again at the reservation, still incredulous. What kind of person prefers invisibility over brilliance, even when they could have it all? That question hung in the air, giving rise to a reflection that challenged appearances and prejudices, casting doubt on the idea that luxury and poverty are only measured by superficial labels. The uncomfortable truth still echoed in the minds of those who witnessed the scene. Sometimes the hardest walls to break down are not physical, but the ones we build in our minds. That man, with his reservation in hand and his hidden past, had given a silent lesson. The lobby, which minutes before felt cold and exclusive, now seemed like a stage where the invisible had come to light, though with many loose ends still untied. Who was he really? What would come next? There were questions that even he did not seem willing to answer that night. But one thing was certain: no one would ever look at a worn jacket again without wondering what story lay behind it. And that was only the beginning of a much larger mystery. The silence in the luxurious lobby was almost palpable, broken only by the sound of heels hastening footsteps and the faint murmur of distant conversations. There he was, a man dressed in modest, almost worn clothing, holding a simple leather folder in his hands, nothing bearing the mark of ostentation. But there was something in his gaze, an unbreakable calm that contrasted with the disbelief beginning to appear on the receptionist's face. Moments earlier, with a confidence that unsettled, our protagonist had placed that folder right on that desk, asking them to confirm his reservation. The usual polite response, however, was not there. Instead, an invisible wall arose, a barrier diplomatically called protocol, which immediately made it clear that, dressed like that, he was not welcome. This rejection, of course, sparked a murmur. Some clients, comfortably seated in leather armchairs and sipping glasses of wine that cost more than the entire dinnerware set in their apartments, lifted their eyes, curious, surprised. They didn't understand. Was it a mistake? A misunderstanding? How could a man with that appearance have booked at the most expensive hotel in the city? The questions floated, but no one dared to intervene amid the growing tension. Meanwhile, he stood firm, never losing composure for a moment. He observed every subtle movement of those around him, noticed the mixed looks of doubt and expectation, but his face betrayed no hint of annoyance or anger, rather a silent determination that spoke louder than any words. All he wanted was for them to confirm his reservation, to do their job without asking him for explanations or questioning his presence. Then what seemed impossible happened. The receptionist, after carefully checking the system, slid a sheet over to the hotel manager. This man, imposing and always calculating, took the document and read silently. His brows furrowed, and his expression, previously neutral, changed completely. It was clear that this didn't quite fit the image he had engraved in his mind about who might be a regular guest at the establishment. The reservation was in the name of that simple man. And it wasn't just any reservation. It was, in fact, the most exclusive, the presidential suite with every imaginable comfort, with exorbitant rates that even the hotel staff couldn't afford without thinking twice. But how was that possible? Who was this man? The confusion began to turn into a parade of incredulous glances from the staff and some guests. Some even dared to look toward the man in humble clothes, searching for signs, some hint that would dismantle the secret behind the reservation. Perhaps it was fake, a system error. But nothing seemed to indicate that. Everything was legal, registered, and confirmed. Here is where the story thickens and begins to reveal layers no one expected. Because, despite what the hotel tried to project, this man was neither an intruder nor a fraud. He had a story that would not only challenge the narrow view of those who judged him but also call into question their own prejudices and, more importantly, those of everyone present that afternoon. That is why when the manager raised his voice and ordered that his room be prepared immediately, the atmosphere grew even tenser. There was something about that man, a mix of humility and dignity, that made everyone want to know more, that no detail remained hidden. The employee assigned to take him to the suite, someone accustomed to dealing with the most refined elite, approached with a mixture of respect and cautious curiosity while the man simply smiled, as if he knew the impact his presence was causing. And then the question arose in the air filled with surprised eyes. If this man, with such a simple appearance, could afford the most luxurious experience, what other secrets lay behind that image? What story was this person hiding? As they walked toward the elevator, the suspense only grew. Each step seemed to trigger memories and contained emotions, untold stories intertwined with the present, offering a puzzle that went far beyond a simple hotel reservation. Because sometimes, as the staff realized, not everything is as it seems. You can't always judge a story by its cover. When they entered the vast suite, reality hit even harder for those watching from the lobby. State-of-the-art televisions, imported tableware, silver cutlery, and panoramic views showing the city skyline in all its splendor. And the man, with simplicity intact in his attire but with confidence unattainable even with all the money in the world, observed the surroundings with a mix of acceptance and tranquility. The employee in charge of reception and escorting couldn't help but ask him, almost in a whisper so as not to break the delicate mood being created, "Sir, would you like something to drink? A rest? This must be different from what you're used to." But the answer was not what he expected. He paused for a moment, then turned and said in a calm, almost reflective voice, "This is not a new place for me. It's just that no one really knew who I was." That confession made the employee pale just a bit because it opened a door to something much deeper and more complicated. What followed was a torrent of memories, revelations, personal history that seemed written to challenge the prejudices at that very moment, to confront preconceived ideas, and to dismantle the notion that appearance defines the value or legitimacy of someone in any space. How could someone who could afford the best in life choose instead to live modestly until that moment? Why never allow luxury to define or weigh him down? The answers were not simple, but they were there, ready to impact and resonate, able to open the eyes of all present and also anyone hearing this story. Both staff and guests began to see him differently. He was no longer just the poor man who had caused discomfort and initial rejection, but a person with a complex life, full of layers, difficult moments, and choices only he could explain. His presence in that hotel was, finally, a living lesson on the power of judgment and the importance of looking beyond appearances. And as the story continued to unfold, one wondered, what else was behind that reservation? What other secrets did that man with the most expensive reservation and simplest appearance hide? Was this just the tip of the iceberg of a story not yet fully told? There was no turning back. The hotel and everyone there faced a new reality, one that challenged their deepest beliefs and showed them that sometimes the greatest treasures are found where you least expect them, and that the most powerful stories are not on the surface but in the willingness to look deeper. The tension did not just remain. It grew more intense because what had begun as a misunderstanding was now a mirror everyone had to face. The man simply left the folder on the table, saying no more, and looked at the person who years ago had been his best friend, now the hotel manager, with a mixture of nostalgia and determination in his eyes. It was a wordless message. Look closely and you will understand that every story is told in its details. And in that instant, luxury and simplicity collided with unexpected force, leaving everyone with a bitter, uncomfortable, yet deeply human taste. Who was that man really? Why had he waited so long to show himself as he truly was? And most importantly, what consequences would this revelation have for everyone inside that hotel and for himself? The answer was yet to come, and no one at that very moment could imagine how much everything would change from there on out. Only one thing was certain: the story was far from over. While the receptionist kept her gaze fixed on the screen, he stood firm, showing not a trace of nervousness or surprise. The facade of a simple man, wearing a somewhat wrinkled shirt and worn shoes, did not remotely match the smiling photo that appeared on the screen in front of her. An elegant man in a tailored suit, with a confident and almost defiant expression. No one who saw him just arriving at that hotel would have imagined they were facing one of the country's most influential personalities. The reservation was under his full name, and not just any reservation. The presidential suite, the most expensive and least available, booked weeks in advance with all premium services included. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she murmured with a mix of confusion and regret. But he did not answer. He maintained that strange, almost enigmatic calm. He took out a small wrinkled notebook from his pocket and began jotting something down quickly, oblivious to the murmur that started spreading through the lobby, as a dozen people approached curiously. No one knew why someone who apparently lived modestly struggled so much to enter that place, but the revelation of the reservation was only the beginning. Could it be that this exclusive environment was just a stage where he did not belong? Or was it part of a much bigger game? A woman joined the man, dressed in an elegant black coat with an inquisitive look. She seemed to be in control of the situation, as if she were the true owner of the hotel, or at least someone accustomed to solving uncomfortable problems like this one. "I'm sorry, sir, that doesn't change what happened. We have very strict protocols here," she declared firmly, glancing quickly at the reservation record on the screen. She was indirectly pointing to the attitude of the entrance manager, implying that the problem couldn't be solved just with an expensive reservation. He looked at her calmly and then said without changing his expression, "Protocols are a problem when they blind people. Let me show you something." With that phrase, he headed toward the area where old images and videos of the hotel were exhibited, archives that showed the history of the place, distinguished guests, and memorable events. There, he took out an old yellow envelope, worn and stamped with the most outdated postal seal one could imagine. "Not everything was born with Wi-Fi and smartphones," he said as he carefully opened the envelope. He took out a magazine clipping from over 20 years ago, an old photo showing him much younger and in a simple suit, being recognized by the hotel management at that time. Apparently, there was a hidden past. This hotel wasn't always inaccessible. Here you could also start from the bottom with work with effort. That was before. Now, it seems only money matters. The difficulty to enter, according to him, was not just with the employees. The system had changed, and he was showing it firsthand. Those moments planted growing doubt in everyone present. The woman in the black coat approached to look at the photo, somewhat less sure than before. The simple man returned to the counter with a look that now held an almost challenging tone, as if daring that closed world that had judged him only by appearances. "Do you know what really weighs more than money in this place?" he asked in a low voice. The silence that followed was tense as everyone awaited his answer. "Stories. The relationships you build, the trust you earn over years. Not the amount in the bank account." No one could argue because the truth contained in those words was impossible to deny. Then the hotel manager appeared among the group, impeccably dressed and with a serious but curious expression. He had heard everything from his nearby office and decided to join the scene. "Can we sit down and talk?" he proposed diplomatically. The attention refocused on the simple man, who nodded and dropped on the table a card he had kept hidden, a badge few knew. Founding member of the hotel chain that had managed that place for decades. A man who had built empires from nothing. A person who knew what hard work was to get closer to his dreams and who had never lost touch with his essence, unlike many stars of that hotel who only arrived because of their bank accounts. That revelation shook the atmosphere, the prelude to a change about to come in a place that for years had preferred to ignore those who did not fit their superficial mold. An uncomfortable silence enveloped everyone until the woman in the black coat, now with an almost shy smile, asked, "So, why did you come dressed like this? Why didn't you say who you were before?" The answer came slowly but clearly. "Because I wanted to be seen as someone else. I wanted to know what a man like me would feel if he faced this door today, instead of 20 years ago." A question lingered in the air. How many times are people judged only by their appearance and not by their story? How many other attempts have been dismissed by blind prejudices? As employees and clients looked at the man who had once been a founder and now presented himself as a stranger, tension gave way to reflection, and the hotel began to feel that maybe it was time to change. But that change would be neither easy nor automatic. Would that elite be willing to recognize that true strength lies beyond money? The simple man stood up, looking around with that mix of nostalgia and hope. "I didn't come here to claim or demand," he explained before leaving. "I came to show you what you have forgotten. This place can be great, but if it keeps closing itself off to others, it will end up empty, inside and out." The door opened again, but now with different eyes behind the counter and those around him. A door that was not only opening for him but for what he represented. The value of humility, silent strength, and the invisible weight of human stories. As the man's figure disappeared down the hotel corridor, a latent question remained with everyone present. What other unknown stories lay behind those walls of luxury? And more importantly, who would be the next one denied access without someone stopping to ask, "What's behind that appearance?" In a world where image is everything, perhaps it was time to start looking beyond. Because sometimes, true wealth is not found in a bank account or a luxury reservation. It is in the ability to see the other without prejudice and with respect. And so, the story did not end with that encounter. It was just beginning to unfold, with promises of deep changes and a world where simplicity and power coexist without exclusion. Because, in the end, the most expensive reservations are worth nothing if they lack humanity. And the simple man, with his $1 million reservation and humble aura, had proven it without saying a single word more. The man with a calm face, still with his head bowed, took a crumpled piece of paper out of his pants pocket. The receptionist, still frowning, glanced at him sideways, hesitating for a moment. "What is that?" she asked curtly. He slowly raised his hand, unfolding the reservation. The handwriting was elegant, almost impeccable, and it gleamed with the hotel's golden logo. A presidential suite, the most expensive in the establishment, under his full name. At that moment the atmosphere changed completely. The murmur at the reception grew louder. Those looks that had earlier shown disdain were now tinged with surprise and nervousness. How could it be? How could someone dressed like that achieve something like this? Someone from the back of the lobby whispered, while several employees exchanged looks mixing confusion with annoyance. He simply waited, unshaken in his calm, as if having that reservation was the most natural thing in the world. Then the manager stepped back, lips pressed tight, pride wounded. But the rule was the rule and there was little to be done. "Your suite is ready," she finally said, handing over the key with a slight tremble in her hand. When the man took that card and began walking toward the elevator, those present could not help but wonder what lay behind that simple appearance and such an extravagant reservation. Who was that man really? Where did he come from? And why had they judged him before even looking at his papers? In the air remained the feeling that this was not just a story of prejudice, but something much deeper, a lesson about how appearances deceive and about the truth hidden behind every face. The elevator door closed slowly, and everyone watched as that simple yet powerful figure disappeared, about to prove that sometimes true power has nothing to do with clothes or visible money. What great mystery did that man hold, who had challenged the hotel's rules and the arrogance of its employees? The story was just beginning, and what seemed like a simple anecdote would become a series of revelations that would forever change the way they saw the world within those golden walls. As the lobby cameras continued capturing every movement, no one imagined that that night, with a simple paper and a firm attitude, something much greater than a mere reservation was being written. Prejudices, stereotypes, and a mediocre way of judging were being broken, which, above all, exposed the fragility of misunderstood power. The echo of that scene would resonate long after, in conversations no one expected, and in a story that would be told again and again, to remind everyone never to judge a book by its cover, and that behind any poor or unknown person there may be someone who changes the rules of the game without raising their voice. The hotel door shuts with a sharp snap behind him. The man, dressed plainly, with a worn backpack and a humble demeanor, stands on the sidewalk, confused and a little hurt. No one would expect someone with that appearance to try to cross the threshold of that exclusive place, a spot where the rich come to show off and where luxury seems like an impenetrable barrier. But he did. And he was stopped almost immediately, as if his clothes spoke louder than his word. "We can't let you in, sir. This hotel is for guests with confirmed reservations and standards." Those words, as cold as the night, still echo in his mind. However, just when the refusal seemed final, something changed. In the lobby, one of the receptionists checked a screen, and his eyes widened with disbelief. "Are you Rodrigo Salazar?" he asked incredulously. The man nodded, not knowing what he was referring to. Minutes later, they pulled out a printer that spit out a sheet he recognized instantly. His name, his reservation, and the most surprising of all, the presidential suite, the most expensive in the hotel. Silence fell like a shroud. How was it possible? That humble-looking man who looked like a tourist would be staying in the best place in town. People's attitudes changed radically in a second. Now everyone looked at him with respect, curiosity, and, for some, even a touch of shame. But the story was just beginning. There was something more behind that seemingly unbelievable reservation. Who was Rodrigo Salazar really? What had led him to show up dressed like that, and not with the pomp the place demanded? While the receptionist took the papers to the manager, everyone in the lobby began to wonder if they had made a grave mistake judging him by his appearance. What was coming would be much more than a simple correction of assumptions. Rodrigo, calm as one who has everything under control, walked toward the entrance again. This time the doors opened without objections. But a question lingered in the air. What story did that man hide, the one who had achieved what so many others desperately longed for? Everyone was about to find out. And believe me, what happened next would forever change how the hotel and its guests viewed the true value of a person. Because sometimes, reservations aren't made only of money, but of secrets, courage, and an unexpected lesson. Can you imagine arriving somewhere and having the door slammed in your face just because of how you look? You feel rejected, singled out, as if the world reminded you that you don't belong. But what if, in reality, you have far more power than people think? Rodrigo knew it and was ready to show it. It wasn't just about a room or preferential treatment. It was about breaking patterns, banishing prejudice, and making everyone understand that true wealth goes beyond clothing or appearance. What seemed like a simple misunderstanding at the hotel entrance turned into a stage for something much bigger, a story of social justice that challenged the whole system. Because, in the end, when that reservation was pulled out, the one signed in his name, it became clear that truth is not always in what we see, but in what we try to understand. Rodrigo, the man many had underestimated, was about to change their perspective forever. And you won't want to miss a single detail of what happened next. Are you ready to discover the truth behind the man who didn't fit in, yet ended up being the most unexpected guest of the hotel? Then stay with me. The story isn't over yet.